Have you ever felt invisible, like you were screaming for respect, but the world only saw you as a servant? Maya felt that every single day. She was just a waitress at New York's most exclusive restaurant trying to survive. Caleb Sterling was the billionaire heir who thought he owned the world and her. He thought he could ruin her life just for a laugh. He pushed her to the edge, insulted her family, and demanded she be thrown out on the street. But Caleb made one fatal calculation. He didn't know who was walking through the door behind him. He didn't know that his father, the most powerful man in the city, was about to freeze cold at the sight of her face. What happened next wasn't just justice. It was a revelation that would burn their dynasty to the ground. You do not want to miss the twist in Part 5. Let's get into it. The humidity in the kitchen of the Obsidian was enough to wilt lettuce in seconds. But out on the floor, the air conditioning was set to a crisp, unforgiving 68 degrees. It was a temperature designed for 3-piece Italian wool suits and velvet evening gowns, not for the thin cotton uniform clinging to Maya Linwood's back. Maya adjusted the heavy tray on her shoulder, taking a split second to breathe. She was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Between the double shifts here and the night classes she was taking for her paralegal certification, sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had a rent payment overdue in Queens, and her mother's medication costs had just spiked again. "Table 4 is yours, Maya," the floor manager, a nervous, sweating man named Mr. Henderson, hissed as he walked by. "And for God's sake, smile. It's the Sterlings." Maya's stomach dropped. The Sterlings. In New York, the name Sterling wasn't just a name. It was a brand of heavy machinery real estate and ruthless acquisitions. Arthur Sterling was the patriarch, a man who had practically built the skyline of Manhattan in the 80s. But it wasn't Arthur sitting at table 4 tonight. It was his son, Caleb. Caleb Sterling was 27, possessed a jawline that could cut glass, and had a reputation that was even sharper. He was known in the tabloids not for his business acumen, but for his destruction. He broke Ferraris, he broke contracts, and he broke people. Maya pushed through the double swinging doors, composing her face into a mask of polite servitude. The dining room of the Obsidian was a cavern of dark mahogany gold leaf ceilings and hushed conversations that could shift the stock market. Table 4 was the prime spot, a semicircular booth upholstered in oxblood leather overlooking the city lights. Caleb was there, flanked by 2 other men, investment bankers or sycophants. It was hard to tell the difference. They were already 3 bottles deep into the wine list. "Gentlemen?" Maya said, her voice steady. "May I refill your water?" Caleb didn't look up. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking aggressively. He wore a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than the house Maya grew up in. "We're waiting on the appetizers," he said to the screen. "It's been 20 minutes. Does the chef need a manual on how to shuck an oyster?" "I apologize for the wait, Mr. Sterling," Maya said, reaching for his water glass. "The kitchen is particularly busy tonight, but I will check on—" "I don't care if the kitchen is on fire," Caleb snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, glazed with alcohol and entitlement. He looked at Maya, but he didn't see her. He saw a prop, an NPC in the video game of his life. "I want my oysters, Rockefeller, and I want another bottle of the 96 Waitress. Now." "I'll bring the wine right away, sir. However, the sommelier mentioned we are down to the last 2 bottles of the 96. I just want to confirm the price point has adjusted too." Caleb slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. The hush in the restaurant deepened, heads from nearby tables turning slightly. "Did I ask for a financial audit?" Caleb sneered, his voice raising a decibel. "Do I look like I need a coupon? Bring the bottle, and don't speak to me about price again. It's tacky. You're making the air smell cheap." His friends snickered. One of them, a guy in a pinstripe suit, leaned in. "Easy, Caleb. She's just doing her job." "She's doing it poorly," Caleb muttered, picking up his napkin and throwing it onto the table as if it were contaminated. "Go." Maya bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Rent, medicine, paralegal degree. She chanted the mantra in her head. She gave a stiff nod and retreated to the service station. Her hands were shaking as she keyed in the order. It wasn't the rudeness. She was used to rich people treating her like furniture. It was the specific malice in his eyes. He was bored, and a bored Caleb Sterling was dangerous. He was looking for a target. She retrieved the wine, a $5,000 bottle of red liquid, and a silver platter of oysters. She took a deep breath. Just get through the service. Drop the food. Pour the wine, fade into the background. She returned to the table. Caleb was laughing loudly at a joke about a hostile takeover that had put 2,000 people out of work. "Here we are," Maya said softly. She placed the oysters down with surgical precision. Then she presented the wine label to Caleb. He waved a dismissive hand. "Just pour it." Maya began to uncork the bottle. It was a delicate process, with a vintage this old. The cork was fragile. She focused entirely on the leverage of the wine key. "So," I told her, Caleb said, his voice booming, "if you want the alimony, you're going to have to beg for it. Literally." He threw his arms out to emphasize the point. It happened in slow motion. Caleb's elbow swung back hard. It connected with Maya's forearm just as she was lifting the bottle to pour. The bottle flew from her hand. For a second, there was silence. Then the shattering of glass. The dark red wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth. It splashed onto the oxblood leather. And most disastrously, a large, jagged crimson stain soaked immediately into the front of Caleb Sterling's grey bespoke suit. The entire restaurant went silent. The music seemed to stop. Maya stood frozen, her hand still outstretched the empty air where the bottle had been. Caleb looked down at his chest. He touched the wet fabric. He looked at his hand stained red. Then he slowly looked up at Maya. The vein in his temple began to throb. "You," he whispered, a sound more terrifying than a scream. "You stupid, clumsy little—" He stood up, towering over her. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "Sir, you hit my arm," Maya said, her voice trembling but audible. "I was pouring, and you moved your—" "I moved," Caleb shouted. The veneer of civilization cracked. "You dropped a $5,000 bottle of wine on a $10,000 suit. You clumsy cow. You think this is my fault. I didn't mean—" "Get the manager," Caleb roared, pointing a finger in her face. "Get him now before I have this entire place bulldozed." Mr. Henderson materialized instantly, looking as though he might faint. He looked from the shattered glass to Caleb's ruined suit, and then to Maya. "Mr. Sterling, oh my God, I am so profusely sorry," Henderson stammered, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and actually reaching out to dab at Caleb's lapel. Caleb swatted his hand away. "Get off me!" Caleb spat. "Look at this. I have a gala in an hour. I smell like a winery floor." "We will pay for the suit, of course," Henderson said, bowing his head. "And the meal is on the house. Everything. Please allow us to—" "I don't want a free meal," Caleb yelled. He turned his eyes back to Maya. She was standing straight, refusing to cower, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I want her gone." Henderson blinked. "Sir War, fired," Caleb said, pointing a shaking finger at Maya. "Right now. I want to see you take her badge or apron or whatever pathetic rags she's wearing and throw her out the back door. If she is still in this building in 2 minutes, I will call my father's legal team and sue this restaurant into bankruptcy. Do you understand me?" The restaurant was dead silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. This was theatre, and Caleb was the star. Henderson turned to Maya. His eyes were apologetic but weak. He was a man with a mortgage and 3 kids in private school. He wasn't going to go to war with the Sterling family for a waitress. "Maya." Henderson whispered, "I think you better go." "Mr. Henderson." Maya said, her voice clear and cutting through the tension. I didn't drop it. He hit my arm while gesturing. "There are cameras. You can check the feed." "I don't care about the damn feed," Caleb interrupted, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and sour grapes. "You are nobody. Do you hear me? You are a tray carrier. I am a Sterling. My word is the feed. Now get out of my sight before I make sure you never work in this city again." Maya looked at him. She looked at the arrogance etched into his features. She thought of her mother sitting in their small apartment, coughing, waiting for Maya to come home with grocery money. She could leave. She could run out the back, crying. That's what he wanted. He wanted her humiliation. He wanted to feel powerful by making her feel small. Maya took a breath. She reached behind her back and untied her apron strings. "You're right," Maya said. Caleb smirked. "Finally. Some intelligence." "I am a nobody to you," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. She pulled the apron off and folded it slowly over her arm. "But I am a human being, and you are a sad, small man who needs to scream at service workers to feel big." The gasp in the room was audible. Caleb's face turned a violent shade of red. "What did you say to me?" "I said," Maya enunciated, "that your money can buy you a new suit, but it can't buy you class. You're a bully, Caleb." She placed the folded apron on the dirty tablecloth, right next to the shattered glass. "I quit." She turned on her heel to walk away. "Oh no, you don't," Caleb snarled. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was painful. "You don't get to walk away with the last word. You apologize. On your knees. You apologize for ruining my night." "Let go of me," Maya said, struggling to pull her arm back. "Apologize!" Caleb shouted, twisting her arm. "Hey!" A customer from a nearby table stood up, a large man in a military cut. "Let her go, pal." "Sit down," Caleb snapped at the stranger. "This doesn't concern you." "Let go of my arm," Maya warned, her eyes flashing with a sudden intense fire. "Now." "Or what?" Caleb sneered. "You'll spill water on me." The doors at the front of the restaurant opened. Usually the entrance of a customer goes unnoticed during a commotion. But the heavy oak doors swung open with a distinct weight. A gust of cold wind from the street blew in, causing the candles on the tables to flicker. A man walked in. He was in his late 60s with silver hair combed back severely. He wore a black overcoat that looked like it was cut from the night sky. He walked with a cane, not out of necessity, but as a weapon. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was Arthur Sterling. He had come to surprise his son for dinner. He had expected a quiet meal, a discussion about the quarterly earnings. Instead, he walked into a silent room. He saw the shattered glass. He saw the spilled wine. And he saw his son, Caleb, twisting the arm of a young woman in a waitress uniform. "Caleb," Arthur's voice rumbled. It wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the kitchen. It was the voice of a man who could silence a boardroom with a glance. Caleb froze. He dropped Maya's arm instantly, as if it had turned red hot. He spun around his face, shifting from rage to panic in a nanosecond. "Dad!" Caleb stammered, smoothing his ruined jacket. "Dad, you're early. I can explain. This incompetent girl, she threw wine on me. She attacked me. Arthur Sterling didn't look at his son. He didn't look at the manager. He was looking at the waitress. Maya was rubbing her wrist. Her face flushed her hair, slightly messy from the struggle. She looked up, ready to fight another rich man. She locked eyes with Arthur Sterling. And then, the impossible happened. Arthur Sterling, the man who was known as the Iron Bank, the man who had never shown fear in his life, went pale, ghostly pale. His cane slipped from his hand and clattered loudly onto the wooden floor. He stared at Maya as if he were seeing a ghost. His mouth opened slightly, his breath hitching. "Dad," Caleb asked, confused by his father's reaction. "Dad, what is it? It's just a waitress. I was handling it." Arthur took a shaky step forward, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. He ignored his son. He ignored the customers. He walked toward Maya as if in a trance. Maya stepped back, confused. "Sir," Arthur stopped 3 feet away from her. He looked at her eyes, green with flecks of gold. He looked at the shape of her jaw, and then his gaze dropped to her neck. There, resting against her collarbone, was a simple, cheap silver chain. But hanging from it was a small, distinct charm, a golden hummingbird with a tiny ruby for an eye. Arthur let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Where?" Arthur's voice cracked, sounding weak and old. "Where did you get that necklace?" The silence in the obsidian had shifted. Before it was the silence of people watching a car crash. Now it was the silence of a church before a funeral. Arthur Sterling was a man made of granite. He was the kind of person who checked stock prices during his own birthday party. He had not cried when his company lost $1 billion in the 08 crash. He had not cried when his wife, Caleb's mother, passed away from a sudden aneurysm 10 years ago. He was the Iron Bank. But now, staring at the cheap silver necklace around the neck of a trembling waitress, his eyes were wet. "That's impossible," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling so much that the people at table 5 strained to hear. "There was only one. I had it commissioned in Vienna. Only one." Caleb looked at his father, then at the waitress, and a cold spike of jealousy pierced his chest. He didn't understand what was happening, and Caleb hated things he didn't understand. "Dad, get a grip," Caleb hissed, stepping between Arthur and Maya. He grabbed his father's shoulder. "It's a cheap trinket, probably bought at a flea market." "Look at her. She's a waitress. She probably stole it." Arthur's head snapped up. The sadness vanished, replaced by a fury so cold it lowered the temperature of the room. He shrugged Caleb's hand off his shoulder with a violence that made Caleb stumble back. "Be silent," Arthur commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a verdict. "One more word. Caleb and I will have security remove you from this building." Caleb's mouth fell open. His father had never humiliated him in public. In private, yes, but never in front of the help. Arthur bypassed his son and stepped closer to Maya. He smelled of old leather and expensive tobacco, an intimidating scent, but his hands were held up in a gesture of surrender. "Miss," Arthur said, his voice, gentle now, terrifyingly gentle. "Please, I need you to tell me. Who gave you that necklace?" Maya pressed her back against the service station counter. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified. She thought she was about to be sued, arrested, or worse. But looking at this old man, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a desperate, broken human being. "My mother," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother gave it to me for my 16th birthday. She said it was the only valuable thing she owned." Arthur closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking through the deep lines of his face. "And your mother? What is her name?" "Cassandra." Maya said. Cassandra Linwood. The name hit Arthur like a physical blow. He staggered, reaching out blindly, until his hand found the back of a chair to steady himself. Cassandra, he breathed. She's alive. Yes, Maya said, confusion knitting her brows. She's at home, in Queens. Arthur opened his eyes. They were suddenly blazing with an energy that hadn't been there a minute ago. He straightened up, the years seemingly falling off his shoulders. He turned to the manager, Mr. Henderson, who was still wringing his handkerchief in the corner. "My car," Arthur barked. "Is it out front?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling. The driver is waiting," Henderson stammered. "Good." Arthur turned back to Maya. "Get your coat." "Excuse me." Maya blinked. "Get your coat," Arthur repeated, though his tone was pleading now, not commanding. "Please, take me to her. Take me to Cassandra. I have to see her. I have to know." "I can't just leave," Maya protested, gesturing to the mess on the floor. "I'm in the middle of a shift. I just got fired. I have to clean this up and I have to sign my termination papers." "You are not fired," Arthur said, his voice booming through the restaurant. He looked at Henderson. "If anyone touches a hair on her head, I will buy this building and turn it into a parking lot." "Do you understand?" Henderson nodded so fast he looked like a bobblehead. "Understood, Mr. Sterling. Perfectly." "Dad, this is insanity," Caleb exploded. He couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation was too much. "You're going to go to some slum in Queens because a waitress has a necklace that looks like something you remember. She's running a scam. She probably looked you up, found out about some old mistress, and bought a fake smack." The sound of the slap echoed off the mahogany walls. Arthur had backhanded his son across the face. It wasn't a hard slap, but the shock of it paralyzed the room. Caleb held his cheek, his eyes wide, stunned into absolute silence. "You have spent your entire life living on the money I made," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "You wear suits you didn't earn. You drive cars you can't fix. You insult people who work harder in a day than you have worked in 27 years. You will get in the car, Caleb. You will shut your mouth. And you will come with us. Because it is time you learned exactly where you come from." Arthur turned to Maya, offering his arm like a gentleman from a bygone era. "Please, Miss Linwood," Arthur said, "allow me to drive you home." Maya looked at Caleb, who was staring at the floor, humiliated and radiating hatred. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who was signaling her to go, terrified of offending the billionaire. She untied her apron, completely dropped it on the floor, and took Arthur Sterling's arm. "Okay," she said. "But if you're coming to my house, we're stopping at the pharmacy first. I need my mum's prescription." Arthur let out a short, wet laugh. "We can buy the pharmacy, my dear. Let's go." The interior of the Maybach limousine was quieter than a library. The seats were made of cream-colored leather that felt softer than human skin. There was a mini-fridge, glowing with soft blue light, stocked with crystal bottles of water that cost $10 each. Maya sat on one side, clutching her battered tote bag to her chest as if it were a shield. She felt dirty in her work uniform, smelling of stale wine and kitchen grease, sitting in a car that cost more than her entire neighborhood. Opposite her sat Arthur and Caleb. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Caleb was sitting as far away from his father as possible, staring out the tinted window. His cheek was still red where Arthur had slapped him. He was texting furiously on his phone, likely to his lawyers or his PR team, to spin the story of the incident at the restaurant before it hit the blogs. Every few seconds he would glare at Maya, a look of pure distilled venom. "This is her fault," his eyes screamed. "I will make her pay." Arthur, however, saw nothing but Maya. He sat with his hands resting on his cane, his eyes tracing her features with a mixture of wonder and grief. "You have her eyes," Arthur said softly, breaking the silence as the car merged onto the Queensborough Bridge. "The same shape. But you have my—" He stopped himself, catching his breath. "You have your mother's chin," he corrected quickly. Maya shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Sterling, you keep talking like you know her. But my mother never mentioned an Arthur Sterling. She hates rich people. She says they're parasites." Caleb scoffed loudly. "Charming." "Caleb," Arthur warned. He turned back to Maya. "She had every right to say that. I knew her a long time ago, Maya. Before I was Arthur Sterling, the tycoon. Before the towers. Before the billions. We were just young. Bahut. If you knew her," Maya said, a sudden defensive edge in her voice. "Where have you been? She's been sick for 5 years. She worked 3 jobs until her back gave out. We've been eating rice and beans for a month so I could pay for her heart medication. If you were her friend, where were you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Arthur flinched. The great billionaire looked small. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Maya. I didn't know she was here. I thought she was in Europe. I thought she was happy." "Happy?" Maya gave a dry, bitter laugh. "She cries in her sleep. She calls out a name sometimes, but it's not yours. She calls for Artie." Arthur's face crumpled. He covered his mouth with a trembling hand. "Artie," he whispered. "She called me Artie." The car began to slow down. They had left the gleaming glass canyons of Manhattan and entered the dense, potholed streets of Queens. The contrast was jarring. Outside the tinted windows, piles of garbage bags lined the curbs. Neon signs flickered with burnt-out letters. People stood on corners in worn-out coats, waiting for buses that were running late. "This is it," Maya said, pointing to a brick building that had seen better decades. There was graffiti on the lower level and a rusted fire escape clinging to the brick facade like a metal skeleton. The driver, a man named Jeffrey, who had seen everything in his 20 years with the Sterlings, pulled the gleaming Maybach up to the curb. It looked like a spaceship had landed in a swamp. "We're here," the driver announced. Caleb looked out the window with open disgust. "You're joking. People actually live here." "We live here," Maya said sharply. "And it's home." "It's a dump," Caleb muttered. "Get out," Arthur commanded, opening his door. They stepped onto the sidewalk. The air here smelled different, exhaust-fried food and damp concrete. A group of teenagers sitting on a stoop stopped talking and stared at the 2 men in $5,000 suits standing next to Maya. "It's the 4th floor," Maya said, leading the way. "The elevator has been broken since Christmas." "Perfect," Caleb groaned. "My loafers have leather soles. They aren't made for this." "Then wait in the car," Arthur snapped, "and let you go up there alone with these grifters. No chance," Caleb said. He wasn't going to let his father sign away the family fortune in a moment of senile weakness. He had to be the witness. He had to stop this madness. They climbed the stairs. The stairwell was narrow and dimly lit. The sound of a couple arguing echoed from the 2nd floor. A dog barked aggressively from behind a door on the 3rd. By the time they reached the 4th floor, Arthur was breathing heavily. He leaned on his cane, his face pale. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, her anger momentarily replaced by concern. "It's a lot of stairs." "I'm fine," Arthur wheezed, straightening his tie. "I would climb a mountain. Open the door, child." Maya unlocked the door with 3 different locks, a necessity in this neighborhood. She pushed it open. The apartment was tiny. It was essentially 1 room with a kitchenette in the corner and a curtain separating the sleeping area. But it was clean. Painfully clean. The linoleum floor was scrubbed, the cheap furniture was dusted, and there were books everywhere. But the overwhelming smell was sickness. It was the scent of rubbing alcohol, old medicine, and stale air. In the corner behind the floral curtain, a rhythmic beeping sound came from a machine. "Mum," Maya called out softly, dropping her bag on the table. "I'm home early. I brought visitors." "Visitors?" A weak, raspy voice called from behind the curtain. "We don't have visitors, baby. Did the landlord come back?" Arthur froze in the center of the room. He knew that voice. It was raspy, with age and illness, but the cadence was the same. It was the voice that had haunted his dreams for 25 years. He dropped his cane. It clattered on the linoleum. He walked toward the curtain. "Dad, don't!" Caleb whispered, reaching out. "This is a trap!" Arthur ignored him. He pulled back the floral curtain. Lying in a narrow bed, propped up by pillows, was a woman. She was thin, her skin papery and pale. Her hair, once a vibrant red, was now grey and thinning. She was hooked up to an oxygen monitor. She looked frail, used up by a world that didn't care about her. But when she saw the man standing at the foot of her bed, her eyes, the same green-gold eyes as Maya's, widened. She tried to sit up, her hand flying to her throat. "Artie," she whispered. Arthur fell to his knees beside the bed. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the dust. He took her frail hand in his and pressed it to his cheek. "Cassie," he sobbed. "Oh God, Cassie, I'm so sorry." Caleb stood by the kitchenette watching the scene with a mixture of horror and confusion. He looked at Maya, who was standing by the curtain, tears streaming down her face. "I don't get it," Caleb sneered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Who is she? His ex-girlfriend? His high school sweetheart?" Maya turned to Caleb. She looked him dead in the eye. "You really don't see it, do you?" Maya asked softly. "See what?" Maya gestured to the bedside table. There was an old photograph in a cracked frame. It was a picture of a young Cassandra holding a baby, and standing next to her, looking young and happy with his arm around her waist, was Arthur Sterling. "Look at the date on the photo," Maya said. Caleb stepped closer. He squinted at the date stamped in the corner of the photograph. June 12th, 1998. Caleb did the math. His eyes went wide. His blood ran cold. He looked at Maya. He looked at his father. "Wait," Caleb stammered. 1998. That's 2 years before. Before your mother died," Maya finished for him. "No, that's not the important date, Caleb." Maya took a step toward him. "My birthday is January 1999, she said. Caleb stared at her. He looked at her jawline again. The one he had mocked. The one that looked just like Arthur's. "No," Caleb whispered, backing away until he hit the refrigerator. "No, that's impossible." Arthur looked up from the bed, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Caleb, and for the first time there was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold, hard truth. "Caleb," Arthur said, his voice steady. "Meet your sister." The word sister hung in the stale air of the Queen's apartment, like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Caleb Sterling looked as if he had been physically struck. He blinked his face, losing all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure of himself. He looked at Maya, really looked at her for the first time. He searched for the flaws, the differences, the things that would prove she was nothing like him. But instead, he saw the undeniable architecture of his own face staring back at him. The high cheekbones, the specific arch of the eyebrow, the stubborn set of the jaw. "You're lying," Caleb whispered. It was a plea more than an accusation. "This is some sick joke. Mum died when I was 17. You were married to Mum. You didn't, you wouldn't." Arthur didn't look at his son. He was still kneeling by the bed, holding Cassandra's frail hand as if it were a lifeline, keeping him tethered to the earth. "I wasn't married to your mother when I met Cassie," Arthur said softly, his voice thick with a regret that had been marinating for 2 decades. "I was 22. I was working in the mailroom of my father's company, pretending to be a nobody so I could learn the ropes. Cassie was a barista at the shop across the street." Arthur looked at Cassandra, his eyes drinking in her tired face. "We were in love," Arthur continued, "the kind of love that burns everything else down. But my father, the great William Sterling, he had other plans. He had arranged a marriage with the daughter of a steel magnate, a merger, not a romance." "So you dumped her?" Caleb spat, regaining some of his venom. "Typical. And now you want to play the hero?" "No." Cassandra rasped from the bed. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were fierce. "He didn't dump me. He disappeared." Arthur nodded, tears finally spilling over. "My father found out. He sent me to the London office on an hour's notice. He told me you had taken a payout. He showed me a check, Cassie, a check for $50,000 with your signature on it. He said you took the money and left the city. He said you didn't want to see me anymore." Cassandra let out a dry, rattling sob. "And he came to me. He told me you were engaged. He showed me the announcement in the paper. He said if I ever tried to contact you, he would have me arrested for harassment. I was pregnant. I was scared, Artie. I ran." Maya stood by the refrigerator, her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the tragedy of her own origin story. It was a story of billionaires playing God with the lives of normal people. Her entire life of struggle, the missed meals, the cold winters, the exhaustion wasn't bad luck. It was an executive decision made by a dead man in a boardroom. "I didn't know," Arthur whispered, pressing his forehead against Cassandra's hand. "I swear to God, Cassie, I didn't know about the baby. If I had known—" "You have a daughter," Cassandra whispered. She looked at Maya. "And she is good. She is so good, Artie. She saved me 1,000 times." Arthur stood up. The grief on his face hardened into a mask of iron resolve. The Iron Bank was back, but this time he was fighting for his family. "This ends tonight," Arthur declared. He pulled out his phone. "I am calling Dr. Aris at Mount Sinai. I'm having the helicopter prepped. We are moving you, Cassie. Tonight. You are going to the VIP wing. You will have the best cardiologists in the world within the hour." "We can't afford that," Maya said instinctively. Arthur turned to her. "You can afford anything. You are a Sterling." "I'm not a Sterling," Caleb interrupted, his voice shaking with rage. "She's not a Sterling. She's a bastard. Legally, she's nothing. You can pay for the hospital fine, assuage your guilt, but don't you dare call her my sister. And don't you dare think she's getting a cent of the trust." Arthur turned on his son. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Caleb," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "go to the car." "Dad, you're making a mistake. You're emotional. You're going to let these grifters steal our legacy." "I said," Arthur roared a sound that shook the thin walls of the apartment, "go to the car." Caleb recoiled. "Caleb," he looked at Maya with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. He pointed a finger at her. "Enjoy the ride while it lasts, waitress," Caleb hissed, "because I'm going to bury you." He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard that a piece of plaster fell from the ceiling. Arthur didn't flinch. He turned back to Maya. "Pack her things," Arthur said gently. "Just the essentials. Leave the rest. We're starting over." Maya looked at the man who was her father. She looked at the expensive suit, the power he radiated. She should have felt relieved. Her financial worries were over. Her mother was going to get help. But as she packed her mother's meager belongings, into a plastic bag, Maya felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She had seen the look in Caleb's eyes. She knew this wasn't the end of the struggle. It was just the beginning of a war. 3 days later, Maya Linwood stood in front of a mirror that was taller than she was. She was in the guest suite of the Sterling estate in the Hamptons. The room was larger than her entire apartment in Queens. It had French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The bed sheets were made of Egyptian cotton that felt like silk. Her mother was stable. The doctors at Mount Sinai had performed an emergency procedure to drain the fluid from her lungs and had put her on a new experimental drug regimen. For the first time in years, Cassandra was sleeping without pain. Arthur had been there every hour of every day, sitting by her bedside, reading to her, trying to compress 25 years of lost time into a single week. But Maya wasn't at the hospital. She had been summoned to the estate for the meeting. She adjusted the dress she was wearing. It was a navy blue sheath dress, modest and professional. It had been delivered to her room that morning, with a note from Arthur Ware this: "Armor up." She walked down the grand staircase. The house was a museum of wealth oil paintings, marble busts, chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. But it felt cold. It felt like a fortress. In the library, the players were assembled. Arthur sat behind a massive oak desk. He looked tired but resolute. Caleb sat on a leather sofa sipping a scotch. He looked relaxed, almost bored. But his eyes were sharp, tracking Maya as she walked in. Next to Caleb sat a man Maya didn't know. He was sharp-featured, wearing a suit that cost more than a car, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maya," Arthur said, standing up. "Come in, sit down." "Who is this?" Maya asked, gesturing to the stranger. "This is Marcus Thorne," Caleb said smoothly. "He's the family's chief legal counsel. He's here to protect the Sterling interests." "I didn't ask for a lawyer," Arthur said, frowning. "I did," Caleb replied, "because, Father, while you are playing house with your long-lost girlfriend, someone has to ensure that this company isn't vulnerable to fraud." Thorne opened a briefcase and slid a piece of paper across the coffee table toward Maya. "Miss Linwood," Thorne said, his voice oily and smooth. "We understand that this has been an emotional week. Mr. Sterling is a generous man. He feels a moral obligation to help your mother due to their past friendship." "Friendship," Maya repeated, raising an eyebrow. "However," Thorne continued, ignoring her, "claims of paternity are a serious matter. They affect shareholder confidence. They affect the trust. Now we have prepared a settlement." Maya looked at the paper. It was a check. The amount was staggering. $10 million. "Take it," Caleb said, leaning forward. "Take the money. Get your mum the best care in Switzerland. Go to law school. Do whatever you want. Just sign a non-disclosure agreement. Admit that Arthur is not your father and disappear." Maya stared at the check. It was more money than she could imagine. It was freedom. It was safety. She looked at Arthur. He wasn't speaking. He was watching her, testing her. He wanted to see what she would do. Maya reached out and picked up the check. Caleb smirked. "Smart girl. I knew everyone had a price." Maya held the check up to the light. $10 million. That's a lot of oysters, Rockefeller. Then slowly and deliberately, she ripped the check in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter down onto the Persian rug. Caleb's smile vanished. "I don't want your money, Caleb," Maya said, her voice steady. "I want the truth. I agreed to the DNA test. I gave the sample yesterday. Why are you trying to buy me off before the results come in?" "Because we know what you are," Caleb snapped. "You're a gold digger. You probably bribed the lab tech. Or," Maya said, taking a step closer to him, "you're terrified. You're terrified because you know exactly who I am, and you know that if I am a sterling, your share of the pie gets smaller." "My share." Caleb laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You think this is about money? This is about blood. This is about legacy. You are a waitress. You serve food. You clean tables. You are not one of us." "Enough," Arthur said. He slammed his hand on the desk. "The results are here." The room went silent. Arthur held up a sealed red envelope. It had the logo of an independent genetic testing facility, one that Arthur had chosen, personally, to avoid any tampering. "I haven't opened it yet," Arthur said. "I wanted us all to be here." Caleb shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked nervous. He glanced at Thorne, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Arthur tore the seal. The sound of the ripping paper was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pulled out the document. He put on his reading glasses. He scanned the page. Arthur let out a long breath. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Maya. 99.999% probability, Arthur read. "Maya Linwood is my biological daughter." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, so strong her knees almost buckled. It was true. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't a grifter. She belonged. "It's a fake!" Caleb shouted, jumping up. "It's a lie. I want a retest." "Sit down, Caleb," Arthur commanded. "It is over. She is my daughter. And as my daughter, she is an heir to the Sterling estate." Arthur stood up and walked around the desk. He stood next to Maya, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And," Arthur added, looking at Caleb with a disappointment that cut deeper than any knife, "it is time to discuss the terms of the Sterling Trust, specifically the moral turpitude clause." Caleb went pale. "What?" "Grandfather put a clause in the trust," Arthur said. "Any heir who acts in a way that brings public shame or ruin to the family name can be stripped of their executive status and their voting rights." "I haven't done anything," Caleb protested. "Really?" Arthur reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and turned it around. It was a video, a grainy cell phone video taken by a customer at the Obsidian 3 nights ago. It showed Caleb screaming. It showed him twisting Maya's arm. It showed him calling her a cow and demanding she be fired. "This video has 3 million views on TikTok," Arthur said quietly. "The board has been calling me all morning. They want you out, Caleb. They say you are a liability." Caleb stared at the screen. The video looped. "You are nobody. You are a tray carrier." "You did this," Caleb whispered, staring at Maya. "You planned this." "I was just doing my job," Maya said coldly. "You were the one who decided to make a scene." Arthur looked at his son. "Effective immediately, Caleb, you are suspended from your position as VP of Operations. Maya will not be taking your job. She has her own path. But you need to learn what it means to be a man before you can be a leader." "You can't do this," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "I am your son." "Yes," Arthur said sadly. "You are my son, and that is why I am doing this, because I failed to raise you right. I gave you everything, and it made you weak. Maya had nothing, and it made her strong." Caleb looked at the lawyer Thorne for help, but Thorne was closing his briefcase. He knew when a ship was sinking. "I will destroy you," Caleb whispered to Maya, leaning in close as he passed her. "This isn't over. Watch your back, sister." Caleb stormed out of the library. Arthur sighed, slumping against the desk. He looked 10 years older. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Arthur said to Maya. "It's okay," Maya said, though her heart was racing. "What happens now?" Arthur smiled, a genuine warm smile. Now we go to the hospital. Your mother is asking for you. And then we talk about your future. You mentioned you were studying law." "Paralegal studies," Maya said. Well, Arthur said, linking his arm with hers. I think we can aim a little higher than paralegal. How does Harvard law sound? Maya smiled. For the first time in her life, the future didn't look like a fog. It looked like a sunrise. But as they walked out of the library, Maya didn't notice that Caleb had left his phone behind on the sofa, and she didn't see the message notification that lit up the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Text message phase 1 complete. The girl is in the house. Proceed with the setup. We plant the evidence tonight. The Sterling annual charity gala was a sea of black ties, designer silk and diamonds that glittered like cold stars under the chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel. Maya stood near the stage, wearing an emerald green velvet gown Arthur had commissioned for her. It was regal, but around her neck she refused to wear the family diamonds. Instead, she wore her mother's cheap silver hummingbird necklace. You look like you're waiting for a firing squad, Arthur joked gently, handing her a glass of champagne. I'm just not used to this, Maya admitted, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Across the room, Caleb Sterling adjusted his cufflinks. He stood next to Marcus Thorne, the family lawyer. Caleb's eyes were dead void of any warmth. Is it done? Caleb whispered. The drive is in her clutch, Thorne murmured, taking a sip of scotch. The NYPD is on standby outside. As soon as the merger announcement starts, the alarms will trip. They'll find the stolen blueprints on her. She'll be in handcuffs before dessert. Caleb watched his sister. He didn't feel guilt. He felt survival. She had come to take his life. He was simply taking it back. The lights dimmed. Arthur walked up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur's voice boomed. Tonight is about family. I used to think legacy was about bank accounts. I was wrong. I would like to introduce you to my daughter Maya, a woman who taught me that the greatest wealth is character. Applause rippled through the room. Maya walked onto the stage, smiling nervously. Suddenly, a piercing alarm cut through the ballroom. Wee-oo! Wee-oo! The door slammed shut. Please remain calm, a voice shouted over the PA. We have a security breach. Confidential defense blueprints have just been downloaded from a device inside this room. A man in a trench coat, Detective Miller, whom Thorne had paid off, stepped onto the stage. No one leaves. We need to search bags near the podium. He walked straight to Maya. Miss your clutch. Confused, Maya handed it over. The detective reached inside and pulled out a slim black hard drive. The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs erupted. Well, well, the detective said. Caught red-handed. Caleb rushed the stage, his face a mask of practiced outrage. Maya, how could you? After everything Dad did for you. You were stealing from us. He turned to the crowd. I told you she was a fraud. She didn't want a family. She wanted a payday. Thorne stepped forward, shaking his head. Arthur, this is a nightmare. We need to distance the company from her immediately. The detective slapped handcuffs on Maya's wrists. The cold steel bit into her skin. She looked at Arthur, expecting anger. But Arthur wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the giant screen behind the stage. Wait, Arthur said quietly. He pulled a small remote from his pocket. I may be old, Caleb, but I am not blind. He pressed a button. The screen flickered. Grainy black and white footage appeared. It was the coat check room, time-stamped 30 minutes ago. The video showed a man in a tuxedo, nervously looking around before slipping a black hard drive into Maya's silver clutch. The man turned around. It was Caleb. The ballroom erupted in shock. Caleb staggered back, his face draining of color. No, that's a deep fake. It is the truth, Arthur said, his voice shaking with fury. I installed the cameras yesterday because I knew you wouldn't accept her. The video shifted to an audio recording from minutes ago. Thorne's voice echoed through the speakers. "She'll be in handcuffs before dessert." Arthur turned to the detective. "Officer, release my daughter, and arrest those 2 men." The detective, realizing he had been exposed, quickly uncuffed Maya. Security guards grabbed Caleb and Thorne. "Dad!" Caleb screamed as he was dragged away. "I did it for the company. I did it for you." "You did it because you are small," Arthur said sadly. "You are out of the company, Caleb, and you are out of my will." As the doors closed on Caleb's screams, a heavy silence fell. Maya stood on stage, rubbing her wrists. She looked at the crowd, then at her father. "I'm sorry," Arthur whispered. "It's okay," Maya said, taking his hand. She turned to the microphone. "My name is Maya. I grew up waiting tables. Tonight you saw greed, but you also saw the truth. The Sterling name has power, and from now on we are going to use it to build people up, not break them down." The room exploded into a standing ovation. 6 months later, the ocean breeze was warm in the Hamptons. Cassandra sat in a wheelchair on the deck, looking healthy and breathing in the salt air. Arthur walked out with a letter in his hand. He looked younger, lighter. He had retired, leaving the company in good hands, while Maya finished her law degree. News from Montana. Maya asked, setting down a tray of iced tea. Arthur nodded. "Caleb is working on a ranch. He says his hands are blistered. He sent a check for $500, the first money he's ever truly earned. He wants it donated to the foundation." Maya smiled, looking at the messy handwriting. "Blisters build character." She sat down next to her parents, watching the waves crash against the shore. She touched the hummingbird necklace at her throat. She thought about the spilled wine, the insults, and the struggle. She wasn't a nobody. She was Maya Sterling, and looking at her family finally whole, she knew she had rewritten the ending. And that is how a simple waitress brought down a dynasty to build a better one. Caleb thought his money made him untouchable, but he forgot that the truth doesn't have a price tag. In the end, Maya went from cleaning tables to leading the boardroom, proving that dignity is worth more than diamonds. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Do you think Caleb deserves forgiveness after working on the ranch? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.